The hidden clash of giants in the Caribbean during World War II is a story that history seldom tells, yet it carries the pulse of courage, struggle, and survival that defines every great human endeavor. While Europe roared with tanks and skies were set ablaze over London and Berlin, far away in the tranquil waters of the Caribbean, another kind of war was being fought silent, unseen, and deadly. It was a confrontation between the might of the German Navy and the quiet resilience of Caribbean people who refused to let tyranny control their seas. This battle was not for glory or fame. It was for survival and for the defense of freedom in one of the most unexpected corners of the world. In the early 1940s, the Caribbean was a lifeline for the Allied forces. The region's oil refineries in places like Trinidad, Aruba, and Curacao supplied the fuel that powered Allied aircraft and ships across the Atlantic. To the German High Command, this made the Caribbean a prime target. Hitler's strategy was simple but devastating: strangle the Allies' supply lines by sending his U-boats deep into enemy waters. What followed was a hidden war beneath the waves, a war of steel predators hunting fragile merchant ships under the golden sun of the tropics. The first German submarines arrived in early 1942, launching a campaign known as Operation Newland. In just days, tankers were torpedoed off the coasts of Trinidad, Barbados, and Aruba. Flames shot high into the sky as fuel burned across the ocean's surface. To those who witnessed it, the scene was surreal paradise had turned into a war zone. The Caribbean, known for its beauty and calm, now echoed with the sound of explosions, the screams of survivors, and the silent approach of unseen enemies. Yet out of this chaos rose the spirit of resistance. The Caribbean people, untrained for war and far from the great military centers of the world, refused to surrender to fear. Sailors continued to navigate dangerous routes, fully aware that every voyage could be their last. Local fishermen became watchers of the sea, reporting strange periscopes or oil slicks that hinted at hidden submarines. In Trinidad, soldiers and civilians worked side by side to fortify ports and repair damaged ships. Across the islands, the will to fight back grew stronger not because anyone told them to, but because they understood that the battle for freedom had come to their doorstep. It was not a grand war fought with headlines and medals, but it was a war of endurance and heart. Every merchant sailor who braved those routes became a soldier without uniform. Every oil worker who kept the refineries running became a lifeline for victory. Every islander who refused to be paralyzed by fear became a symbol of human courage. They stood as living proof that the spirit of defiance does not belong to great armies or famous leaders alone. It belongs to every soul that chooses to stand when darkness threatens to consume the world. The Germans underestimated this strength. They believed the Caribbean would be an easy target, soft, unguarded, and disconnected from the main theaters of war. But they were wrong. The United States and British forces quickly established bases across the region. Air patrols scoured the skies, radar stations watched the waves, and the once quiet islands became hubs of strategic importance. Slowly, the tide began to turn. German submarines, once hunters, became hunted. Each time they struck, the Allies struck back harder. The sea that once seemed helpless now became a graveyard for boats that dared to enter too deep. But beyond the weapons and the strategies, the real victory was human resilience. Imagine the young sailor standing on deck at night, scanning the horizon for the faint shimmer of a periscope, knowing that one torpedo could send him into the black depths below. Imagine the families onshore waiting for loved ones who would never return, yet still finding the strength to keep sending others to sea. Imagine the local communities that refused to let fear silence them, people who lived with the constant hum of war and still found reasons to hope, to build, and to dream. That is where the true heart of this battle lies. History often forgets the quiet struggles that shape great outcomes. The Germany vs. Caribbean confrontation did not decide the fate of the world in one decisive moment, but it played its part in a chain of courage that stretched across continents. Every drop of oil that made it safely to Allied hands kept planes flying, ships moving, and armies supplied. Every merchant convoy that survived those waters was a victory, a silent one, perhaps, but no less meaningful. The lesson of this forgotten battle reaches beyond history. It tells us that no struggle is too small to matter, no effort too minor to make a difference. Just as the Caribbean's hidden defenders played their part in a global fight for freedom, so too does every person today who stands for truth, courage, and perseverance contribute to a larger victory, the victory of the human spirit over fear and oppression. Greatness is often born not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where ordinary people do extraordinary things without expecting recognition. The hidden clash of giants in the Caribbean reminds us that life itself is a battlefield of unseen wars. Every day we face challenges that may not make the headlines: inner struggles, silent sacrifices, battles fought within the heart. And yet, just as the Caribbean stood strong against an invisible enemy, we too are called to stand firm when the waves rise against us. The measure of greatness is not how loudly we fight, but how deeply we endure. In the end, when we look back on history and our own lives, the forgotten battles often shine the brightest. They reveal who we truly are when no one is watching. The German U-boats have long sunk, their rusted hulls resting in silence beneath the Caribbean waves. But the courage of those who resisted the sailors, workers, and islanders still lives on, whispering a timeless truth, that even in the quiet corners of the world, the fire of freedom burns fiercely. That is the hidden clash of giants, not just a military encounter, but a story of humanity's unbreakable will. It is a reminder that every ocean, every shore, and every heart has the power to stand against the darkness and keep the light of liberty alive. Courage beyond the headlines is one of the most powerful lessons hidden within the story of the Caribbean during World War II. In the great sweep of history, the names that echo are often those of generals, presidents, and nations. Yet behind those names stand countless men and women whose sacrifices are rarely spoken of, people who fought in silence, who endured without applause, and who gave everything without expecting their names to be remembered. The Caribbean people of that era were among them. Their courage did not roar, it whispered, but that whisper carried the weight of freedom. When the Second World War stretched its dark shadow across the globe, few could imagine that the Caribbean, known for its calm waters and vibrant beauty, would become part of the battleground. The German U-boats, sleek and merciless, began to strike the lifelines that kept the Allied forces alive. They came to destroy the oil tankers, the merchant ships, and the convoys that moved through those turquoise waters, unaware, perhaps, that they would awaken a spirit of courage among the islands that no torpedo could sink. The Caribbean people were not soldiers by trade. They were sailors, fishermen, dock workers, oil refinery laborers, and ordinary citizens. Yet when the war came to them, they did not shrink back, they adapted. They resisted, and in doing so, they became warriors of a different kind. There were no medals for their bravery, no parades in their honor, but their contribution was vital. Without their courage, the fuel that powered Allied victory might never have reached its destination. Without their vigilance, the seas might have fallen completely under enemy control. Imagine a merchant sailor in 1942 steering his ship through waters he knew were haunted by unseen killers. Every ripple on the surface could be the sign of a lurking submarine. Every calm night could end in fire. Yet he sailed anyway, not for glory, but because someone had to. His courage was not loud or dramatic, it was quiet, consistent, and unshakable. He knew that fear could not stop the mission. He understood what Napoleon Hill once said, that within every challenge lies an equal seed of strength, waiting to be awakened by faith and purpose. And then there were the oil workers of Trinidad, Aruba, and Curacao, who kept the refineries running while the threat of attack loomed overhead. They worked under blackout conditions, guided by dim lamps and burning determination. To them, every gallon of fuel refined was a blow against tyranny. Every day they returned to work, they silently declared, "We will not be broken." These were not trained soldiers, yet they fought with a soldier's heart, a heart that refused to yield. Even the civilians who lived along the coasts showed a courage that defies description. Mothers and fathers sent their sons to sea knowing they might never come back. Island communities learned to live with the sight of burning ships on the horizon, and yet they carried on building, helping, believing. When the enemy sought to bring terror, they answered with unity. When fear tried to paralyze them, they chose faith instead. That is the essence of courage, not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. History often forgets such people, but their spirit forms the foundation of every victory. They remind us that greatness does not depend on fame, uniforms, or recognition. It depends on conviction. The courage beyond the headlines is the kind that holds civilization together when the world seems to fall apart. It is the quiet voice that says, "I will not give up," when surrender seems easier. It is the inner strength that keeps a ship moving forward even when the night is long and the danger unseen. And this lesson reaches beyond the past. In every generation there are wars fought without fanfare, the battles of endurance, integrity, and hope. A teacher who guides children through hardship, a worker who provides for a struggling family, a nurse who faces danger to save others, these are the modern echoes of that same Caribbean courage. They do not fight with guns or torpedoes, but with faith, perseverance, and love. Napoleon Hill once said, "Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit." The forgotten heroes of the Caribbean proved this truth. Their adversity, being caught in a war they did not start, became the seed of a greater strength that uplifted generations after them. They turned fear into purpose, danger into duty, and obscurity into silent honor. We live in a world that often celebrates the visible, the loud, the dramatic, but the real builders of progress are still those who work unseen, the people whose courage sustains families, communities, and nations. Just as the Caribbean defenders stood firm against German aggression, we too are called to stand firm against the unseen challenges of our own time, doubt, fear, and despair. The same fire that burned in them burns in us, waiting to be awakened by purpose. So when history forgets the names, when no one writes the story, when no one sees your effort, remember this. Courage beyond the headlines is still courage. The seas they sailed are now calm, the oil fires long extinguished, but the echo of their bravery lives on in every act of quiet endurance. Their story tells us that even in silence, even without applause, one person's steadfastness can help keep the light of freedom burning. That is what true courage looks like, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that sustains the world when no one is watching. It is the heartbeat of every great age, the soul of every lasting victory, and the invisible force that makes heroes out of ordinary people. Every forgotten front of war teaches us a truth that transcends history, that greatness is not always born in glory, but in endurance. The story of Germany versus the Caribbean during World War II is more than a tale of submarines and sinking ships. It is a timeless reflection of how even the smallest corners of the earth can carry the weight of world destiny. In the quiet struggle of those tropical islands lies a lesson for every generation, that courage and purpose can thrive even in obscurity, and that the light of hope can shine brightest in places the world forgets to look. The Caribbean was never supposed to be a major theater of war. The people who lived there did not expect to find themselves entangled in a global conflict driven by empires far beyond their shores. Yet destiny has a way of testing those who least expect it. When German boats invaded their waters, it was not mighty armies that stood in their way, it was fishermen, merchant sailors, and oil workers who refused to surrender what little they had. They had no grand speeches or world headlines to strengthen them. What they had was faith, duty, and the will to endure. Endurance is the hidden engine of greatness. It is the unseen force that keeps a man moving forward when fear claws at his heart. It is what makes a sailor return to sea after watching his comrades go down in flames. It is what makes a mother light a candle for her son and whisper a prayer into the night, believing that hope can travel farther than any torpedo. These small acts of perseverance, repeated across countless lives, form the foundation of history's greatest triumphs. The world may not remember their names, but the freedom we enjoy today is built upon their silent strength. Napoleon Hill often said that adversity does not destroy the strong, it reveals them. The Caribbean people's endurance revealed a strength that the world had overlooked, the power of ordinary individuals who refused to give in to despair. Each time a ship was sunk, another would sail. Each time fear swept through the islands, communities gathered together, refusing to let panic dictate their lives. Their endurance became a quiet rebellion against tyranny, a statement that even small nations could stand tall when tested by the storms of history. And isn't that the story of humanity itself? Time and again, history shows that the ones who endure the longest are not always the strongest, but the most steadfast. Empires rise and fall, battles rage and fade, but endurance, the human spirit's refusal to yield, endures forever. The Germans brought submarines and steel. The Caribbean brought faith and resilience. In the end, it was endurance that triumphed, not weapons. Every person faces their own war not with bullets and bombs, but with doubt, failure, and fear. The lesson of that forgotten front applies to us today as much as it did then. You do not need fame or an army to change the world. You only need the endurance to keep moving forward when life seems impossible. The Caribbean defenders did not fight for recognition. They fought because something within them refused to break. That same strength lives within every person who chooses to persist, no matter how small their corner of the world may seem. Greatness, as Hill taught, is not measured by applause or recognition, but by consistency of purpose. When you stand your ground in the face of hardship, when you keep faith in yourself while others give up, when you endure long enough for the tide to turn, you have achieved greatness, even if no one sees it. That is the kind of victory the Caribbean earned during World War II, a victory not of dominance but of resilience. The world may forget the battles fought in the Caribbean, but the lesson it left behind remains eternal. Every challenge you face carries the same opportunity they had to prove that even when you are overlooked, your endurance matters. The waves that tried to crush them became the waves that carried their legacy forward. Their story whispers to every dreamer, every struggler, every unseen hero, keep going. The world may not notice you today, but history is built by those who refuse to quit. In the end, the Germany vs. Caribbean battle is not just a forgotten war, it is a living metaphor. It reminds us that purpose gives strength and endurance gives victory. When the storms of life surround you, remember those silent heroes who held their ground in the face of overwhelming odds. They did not wait for recognition. They simply endured, and in that endurance they changed the course of history. So let the world chase headlines and applause. You focus on endurance. Be steady, be faithful, and believe that no matter how small your fight seems, it matters. Because, just like the Caribbean's quiet stand against tyranny, your endurance may be the hidden strength that keeps the light of hope alive for generations to come.